this is basically the point of what he's been trying to do by using these skeptical arguments. He's doing two things. One, by using the skeptical arguments, he's trying to clear away some beliefs that he thinks have crept into philosophy that are questionable. But he's using this method. Remember, we said it had various names: methodic doubt, methodological skepticism, hyperbolic doubt. He's raising these unusual doubts with a purpose in mind. What he's trying to do is to get to a principle or some principles that are so certain that they are beyond doubt. And that's going to function like axioms do in Euclid's system of geometry. Give us some absolutely true truths. So we saw that Descartes thinks we can call into question beliefs that we have from our senses, even beliefs that seem absolutely certain and true, like beliefs we have about the room or the space that we're in, about what exists around us. He calls this into doubt by conjecturing that, well, even though they seem clear and real, he says, well, I've also had very vivid dreams in which I thought I was sitting in my living room by the fire in my easy chair, and I woke up in bed and I found that it was all just a dream. So he raises a question, well, couldn't I be dreaming now? And he says he doesn't know of any sure tests, recognizing that our eyes are open, feeling our hands. He says all of this stuff can be done in the dream. So he doesn't know of any sure tests that are going to distinguish a dreaming state from a waking state. And note in that video that we showed on The Matrix, Morpheus asked that question. He says, have you ever had a dream that was so real that you couldn't distinguish between the dream and reality? And of course, the whole point of The Matrix is for these people, it's a computer-generated world that seems so real to them that they don't know the difference between the false world that's been pulled over their eyes by the Matrix and the real world. So this conjecture that we might all be dreaming calls into question what's going on around us, but also any sciences that are based on observational evidence now have that evidence sort of called into doubt, because if we have composite objects, maybe the parts are real, but things composed of them aren't. I'm not going to emphasize this slide very much, but this is an important consequence of Descartes' dream conjecture, and the doubts he raises about knowledge that we have via our senses, is that those doubts extend not just to our common sense views about what's going on in the room we're in, but any sciences based on observations of the senses for the knowledge that they claim to give us of reality are now put into the questionable category. And even in Descartes' day, the 1600s, you had rudimentary forms of physics, astronomy, and chemistry around. But note how they depend on observation observational evidence or observations aided by things like telescopes and microscopes. So these sciences, he says, may be dealing with unreal objects. Now, he says, I can't doubt every belief I have just by saying, well, you know what, we might be dreaming. What he says is, you know what, even if I'm dreaming all this, I can't doubt that a square has 4 sides, a triangle has 3, that 2 plus 3 equals 5. He says, even in a dream, this is so. I always wondered about statements like 2 plus 3 equals 5, right? I mean, if things tend to go in and out of existence in a dream, how do you know that 2 plus 3 equals 5? But Descartes says that sciences like mathematics, arithmetic, and geometry, dealing with the simplest, most general things, are still intact, even if the conjecture that we might be dreaming calls in question what our senses tell us. Now, here's where Descartes really goes out on a limb. Here's where his view and his doubts are going to seem very hyperbolic and strange. Is there any way that he can throw some kind of doubt over mathematical knowledge? Well, he says, I can't do it by the conjecture that I might be dreaming. But think of it this way. Have you ever gotten less than 100% on a math test? Have you ever screwed up along the way when you're trying to work a math problem and you come out with the wrong answer? Or worse yet, you come out with the right answer because you made 2 mistakes that cancel each other out. Yeah, I mean, if you kind of keep that in mind, Descartes' conjecture here is not going to seem as way out in left field. Well, okay, so he says the parts are real even if they're about imaginary objects. So mathematics deals with very general things, but here's where I want to go with it. I mean, we don't want to get too abstract, but he says, can anything cast doubt on this kind of apparently certain knowledge, like that 2 plus 3 equals 5, or that a square has 4 sides? And here's where he brings in the evil genius, or an evil demon. Descartes says, well, I can screw up doing a math problem. What if there were some evil entity? Now he says, remember, Descartes is a good Catholic boy, and he's not going to get himself in more trouble than he's already in by suggesting that maybe God is malevolent enough to screw up us, up when we're trying to do a math problem, right? In part because it seems inconsistent with God's goodness that he would do such a thing, and he also needs God later on to bail him out. That we're created to be deceived about such beliefs. Now, he raises a question that he never adequately answers. He says, God seems to allow us to be deceived sometimes. Why not always? But, he says, if God is the source of goodness and truth, why couldn't I have some malevolent demon or evil genius constantly deceiving me? In other words, I've always believed that 2 plus 3 equals 5. But little did I know that it's really 6. But some evil demon has been messing up my mind all along to make me believe something that's false about mathematics. Again, it has more credibility if you think of it in terms of doing a proof, where, you know, if you have some evil genius messing up your mind while you're trying to work through a problem in math and throwing you off track so that you get the wrong answer. I think that's more credible what he has in mind. So he says, suppose we brought in this character, couldn't that enable me to throw a way out hyperbolic doubt, a way out in left field doubt on even the supposed knowledge I have from mathematics? So he says yes. You know, so by bringing in the evil genius, he can doubt just about everything. Says a powerful enough demon could delude him in judgments about the reality of the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, all external things, and even about whether he really has a body with hands. He says we could doubt all this stuff. And so he says all these beliefs can be set aside as if they're false. So does anything else remain? Folks, does our story have a happy ending, or does it end here? What does? It's got a happy ending. Right. Here's what Descartes' looking for. I don't know if you remember the story of Archimedes in physics. Remember, you have levers, right? And by applying leverage with the tool of a lever, you can lift something that's heavier than you normally would be able to lift, right? I mean, it might be a whole pile of wood or stones or something, or some big piece of stone that I couldn't lift by myself, but with a lever I could lift it, you know, literally applying leverage. And Archimedes was famous for saying, you know what, if I had a long enough lever and I could get enough leverage, in theory I could lift even the earth itself. You know, that's how good a lever can be in enabling you to lift what you normally couldn't do. But what do you need to do that? Well, what you need in order to use such a lever, let's say you got the earth here, right? You know, and you know, you got a lever that's long enough. But what you need is you need a fixed point to rest it on, right? To get that leverage, right? It's like a seesaw. Seesaw wouldn't work if it wasn't attached at some point. And so what Descartes says is, if I can find an absolutely true truth that's beyond doubt, that would be like the fixed point that Archimedes needs for his lever. You know, I could rest everything on that. A fixed, immovable, unshakable truth. So so Archimedes claimed movement of the entire earth would be possible from resting the lever on one firm, immovable point, and Descartes longs to find one certain unshakable truth on which to rest the whole of knowledge. At least one truth like this. So, here's what he says. He says, even if he's authored his own thoughts and he's dreaming, even if he is convinced himself or some demon is deceiving him, that there's absolutely nothing in the world, no sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Even if he's being deceived about all this stuff, even if he is prone to doubt all of these truths and all of this possible knowledge, Descartes says the one thing I can't doubt is that I'm here to do the doubting. If I'm deceived by that malevolent demon about everything else, all the other beliefs that I have, Descartes says, the one thing I can't be deceived about is that I'm here to be deceived. So Descartes takes this as his immovable point, his first truth. What is absolutely beyond doubt, even if you're doubting everything else, even if you're deceived in your beliefs about everything else, the one thing you can't be deceived about is that you exist. Right? And so he takes this as his first truth. In the Meditations, so he says the deceptive demon would be unable to make his own existence doubtful. So he says, even if a demon's constantly deceiving me, I have to exist. I have to be around to be deceived. I just essentially made that point, but it's in the slide. Now, the way he gets out this truth in the Meditations is he says the statement, the proposition, I am or I exist, he says is necessarily true every time I think it or pronounce it. So that's his Archimedean point, his indubitable axiom, what he can base the rest of knowledge and philosophy on. Now, the way he expresses it in a longer, more technical book, The Discourse on Method, is the way that, this is one phrase that if you, before you took any philosophy, that you heard, right? It's the phrase cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am, or therefore I exist. In other words, if I'm a thinking, conscious being, I have to exist to be one. So this is Descartes' first truth or axiom. And he tries, one thing Descartes is famous about is trying to clarify, and I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, just who and what we are. He says it's unclear what rational and animal means. In one of Plato's dialogues, they're trying to get at what's the nature of a human being. How should we define a human being? And along the way, somebody says, well, here's a definition of a human being. A human being is a featherless biped. And then somebody brings into the discussion a plucked chicken and says, well, this is a featherless biped. Is this a human being? Well, of course it's not, right? So that sends them back to the drawing board on their definition of a human being. But finally, Plato says, well, we're basically a rational animal. We're an animal that uses reason. But Descartes says, I don't like the classical definition because it's not real clear what we should mean by rational and animal. And so he says, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to get out my own definition of what we are as human beings. And essentially, we, for Descartes, are our souls. The immaterial part of us. He says, yeah, I believed I had a body, believed that I performed various functions related to my mind or soul, that is perceiving, thinking, willing things. But he says I gave little consideration to the soul's nature. It was like a wind or a fire or an ether. there was a debate that went well into the 20th century about whether the luminous ether existed. Because in the early days of radio, the thought was, I mean, take a pond, right? Completely calm water. You throw a rock in it, you know what happens. You get waves coming out in a circular pattern from where the rock went into the pond. You know, those waves are waves that travel through a medium, water. So the thought was, if radio waves were waves, there must be some medium through which they travel, and the unperceived luminous ether was hypothesized as that medium until Einstein shot it down later on. So here is where we get what Descartes does is, this is a definition or a list of the qualities of his body, our human bodies, but also the word body is used kind of ambiguously. It can refer to our physical material bodies, but as these philosophers, these modern philosophers use it, it also is a synonym for matter, for material substance, for the stuff we find in this world, right? So here he says, here are the properties of matter. It has shape, it's located in space, and he's got Newton in mind when he's saying some of this stuff. It occupies space to the exclusion of other bodies. It's perceivable by the senses and is capable of motion in space. But for Descartes, but he says the deceiver called these qualities into question. So he says, what is the nature of the I which I am? And so he says the body's existence is doubtful as a material thing, right? We already saw that. We'd all be brains in a vat and have the same experience. But he says, what is this soul, this I that necessarily exists? And he says, basically, it's my immaterial self, or soul. And the chief attribute of that is thought. The chief attribute of matter is location in Newtonian space. So Descartes says thinking is inseparable from what I am. That's why he says, if I think, therefore I am. So if I should cease to think, then I should, or have conscious experiences, then I would cease to exist. So he says, strictly speaking, I am essentially a thinking thing. I am a thing to think, says Descartes. So thought is the nature of body. And by thinking, he also means that we have various processes that go on in us. Doubting, understanding something, affirming, denying, imagining. So at any rate, there's a little bit more that I want to go into, but and so you can look at the last one. We're going to finish this up and start on the empiricists, but this is a good place to end. So he says, what I mean by thinking is that we have a mind in which certain mental processes take place. Okay. Thank you for coming. Have a good weekend. I think it's going to be cold this weekend. if you need to sign the roll, it's here on the way out. Thanks very much. I'm going to make visible to you another PowerPoint on the British empiricists, because that's where we're going next, the opposing view of knowledge, but we have a little bit more of a part to finish up before that. Thanks for coming.